Hello Internet, Zach here, and welcome back to Make Things, the series where I make things. Now some would say a rose is a rose is a rose. But what about when it glows? In this episode I'm going to show you how to make this fun little battery-powered LED rose. And you can make a bouquet of them for someone special this Valentine's Day. The first step is going to be to separate the flowers from each other. Next step is to take the flower apart. The rose part comes off the top. The leaves slide right off the stem like that. And this plastic here that's coating this inner steel wire is for the most part just going to get in your way. So go ahead and rip the plastic off. The next thing you're going to need to do is remove any residual plastic from the end of the steel wire just by scraping it with the edge of your utility knife until it's a bit more shiny like that. And get your solder flux. Put a dab of solder flux on the end of this wire. Bring some solder in. Whoops. Just run the solder back and forth until it sticks well to the end of the wire. Next thing you'll need is a color changing LED. These are available on the internet. eBay has them, Amazon has them, Alibaba has them. Just do a search for slow color change RGB LED. It slowly changes from red to yellow to green, the turquoise to blue to purple, and then eventually to white and back to yellow and red. And what we're going to do with this is locate the negative lead. When they're brand new, that's going to be the shorter of the two leads. And trim that down just to the little indentation that's already on the wire. Like that. Take your steel wire that you've pre-soldered, and we're going to solder the LED onto this wire. Holding it in alignment is the tricky part. Oh, best to do that in the frame. There you go. LED soldered onto the wire. Next, we're going to trim down the positive lead and get one of these small 100 ohm resistors. Now, this isn't strictly necessary when you're running the LED off of a single 3-volt battery, although it will help the battery last a little longer, and if you were using a higher voltage than 3 volts, it would prolong the life of the LED as well. So just trim that off really short. Give it a teensy dip in the flux. And as always, the hard part's holding it in alignment. This is when I'm using bad soldering techniques. That is, grabbing some solder with the iron and relying on putting flux on the parts to connect them. Just because I don't have 3 hands. I wish I did sometimes. This is one of those times. So now you have an LED and a resistor, and it's all nicely on this wire. Okay, the next thing you do is take a small piece of floral tape. Just rip that off, that's a bit over an inch. Not super critical. Fold it over your steel wire and negative lead. And gently wrap it under the resistor. So you make sure your resistor and your positive lead stay free of the tape. And wrap the tape around your steel wire. That'll provide a layer of electrical insulation between the wire and the resistor. Now take your 30 gauge copper beading wire. This is available at most craft stores. And take your utility knife and just scratch a little bit of the lacquer off of it. The lacquer gets in the way of the solder sticking, and so you need to remove it. Dip it in the flux. Hit it with some solder and just rub the solder back and forth until you see the wire turn silver. And that's when you know the wire's properly covered in solder. Now trim down the lead on the resistor. And for these, it's best to take the wires, twist them together a little bit, and then hit them with a little bit of solder. And trim off any pointy, pokey parts of the wire that are still hanging off. So you don't want this to be pointy and pokey. Okay, take a couple of inches of floral tape. Start at the bottom of the LED. Just carefully wrap the tape around the wire. And you can wrap it around both wires, both the steel wire and the copper beading wire, because the lacquer on the beading wire acts as electrical insulation and prevents this from shorting out. Now here, you cut the wire so it's about an inch or so short of the end. And scrape the lacquer off this end. Dip it in the flux and use the residual solder on the iron to tin the end of this one. Now this is a good time to take the battery, hold it against the, hold on, I almost did something silly. You're going to need to scrape the end of the wire here free of any plastic to get a good electrical connection. Okay. Now notice the top side has a plus sign. So you put the bottom side against the steel wire, touch the beading wire to the plus side of the battery, and make sure your LED still lights up. Okay, now that you know your LED works, it's time to get the hot glue gun out. And we're going to put hot glue all over the LED, and what this does is it helps diffuse the light. Because while the glue looks water clear right now, once it cools down, it'll take on a frosted appearance, and that's going to scatter the light and pesky strings. So as that's cooling, I'm going to take the end of the wire and stuff it down the hole in the middle of the flower. Make sure the beading wire follows the steel wire down. Carefully push everything through. Oops, glue's not totally set yet, but that's okay. The glue's cool enough to touch, and handling the glue actually makes the surface more frosty, and that'll diffuse the light better. Now notice the resistor, where the tape is thicker because there's a resistor under it, that's not going to be able to go down through that hole. That's fine. Because when you fluff the flower back up, that's how it's going to look. So, connect the battery, test it. And while we're at it, wrap this wire down, and then we can build the battery box. The battery box is made of two parts. A battery holder designed for the CR2032 button cells. These button cells are 2 for $1 at the Dollar Tree. Not hard to find. These battery holders are available on eBay, Amazon, Alibaba. Just do a search for them, you'll find them. Same for these little mini slide switches. It's just a simple SPDT or single pole double throw slide switch. And a little bit of simple assemblies required for this. First off, this here is going to be the positive connection on the battery box. It's the one that goes to the small tab. You're going to want to very gently bend this metal pin. Not too forcefully because it's easy to break. Take a little dab of hot glue. Glue on here. Then you glue the slide switch onto here, so that the middle wire is touching the pin that you folded over. Now to get better contact, gently grab the bottom of that pin with your needle nose pliers. And fold it down so the center pin, so the positive pin from the battery holder is overlapping the center pin of the switch. Okay. And that's the center pin of the switch soldered to the positive pin of the battery box. Alright, take some more floral tape. And continue wrapping down the stem. Till you have about an inch of the green wire. Just leave that hanging out, and then continue wrapping further down the stem. Until you're about 3/4 of an inch from the bottom. And then just rip off the tape and stop there for a moment. Take the leaves, slide those over the steel wire, and stick the beading wire in. Now, because the plastic's missing, the leaves might slide too easily back and forth. So just rip off some more floral tape, find the spot where you want the leaves to go, then just wrap the tape to make a slightly thicker area on the stem that the leaves can stick onto. Mash the tape down, slide the leaves down, and now they're stuck. Take one of the pieces of wire that you trimmed off of the LED, wrap it onto the steel wire, might want to pinch it with the pliers so it's on there tightly and not poking, and leave a little tail on the end of it. Give that a good beat of solder. Now take the battery box that you completed earlier, wrap the wire from the LED around the negative terminal of the battery box, and you're going to have some left over, so you can wrap that back around the stem to make it a little more sturdy. Okay, prop this part up. Once again, hit it with some solder, give it a relatively generous bead of solder, don't be too stingy. There you go. There's the stem stuck to the battery box. Now take the positive wire, that's your piece of green beading wire, and you just want to pick a free pin on the switch. There will be two outer pins. Either one will work. If you have a preference for which way you want to slide the switch to turn the light on, then make sure your wire's on the on side. And the pliers help to get the wire tightly curled up around that terminal. Grab your iron and stick that on with some solder. Focus. Now take a little more floral tape and pretty this up a bit. Well, before you do that, it's always good to test. Take the hot glue strings off, snap a battery in, throw the switch, okay, now we can pretty up the stem a bit. Take your floral tape, mash it down, tape down any visible wires. And tape over that raw end of the wire here. And there you go. One battery-operated color-changing rose.